Finally, we have our last talk of the weekend, and this will be Mario Telò from UC Berkeley, and his talk is entitled Talos Tales, Poetic and Robotic Intensities. Take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Chiara, and thank you, Adrian, for organizing this great conference and for the invitation. And thanks to Mary as well, who has been maneuvering the whole operation so efficiently. And thank you to Ronnie as well. And we will keep talking about media in my paper. So here goes nothing. What does it mean to think of politics as intensity, or more specifically, an intensive force, a conation expressed as a depersonalized insurrectionary surge? Speaking of the surge of demonstrations provoked by the murder of George Floyd, Angela Davis has voiced the need for thinking about how we respond to what she calls the lost intensity of the moment, how we prolong the intensity of the moment of protest into its aftermath. Davis poses, in a sense, the question of the relation, etymological and conceptual, between intensity and insistence. As a spatial stretching, intensity is part of the conceptual field covered by insistence, which connotes a temporal stretching, a prolonged remaining in place, as it were, that stretches the body, but also the structural, formal contours of the social. In my paper, I want to explore the possibilities of this political stretching by focusing on a specifically metallic intensity in Apollonius's Argonautica, the sound of a brazen disability or hyperability, an insurrectionary insistence clanging forth from the exertions of the giant Talos. In this exploration, I will embark on an exercise of radical formalism, which I intend as both a practice of hyper-formalistic reading and as an instrument of radical, that is, emancipatory metapolitics. While my emphasis will be on the aesthetico-political link between intensity and disability, toward the end, through the affinities between Talos and his enemy MEDEA, I will also consider what I call intensive feminism. Throughout, I will read the Apollonian passage in the light of a book by Jacques Derrida, Glas, originally published in 1974, but newly translated with the title CLANG by David Wills and Jeffrey Bennington in the Posthumanities series edited by Gary Wolf. This essay shows us, in fact, a quasi-Deleuzian Derrida, if you will, a Derrida, in fact, interested in the logic of sensation, in the minoritarian force of a phonesteme, gla, which I connect with the phonetic intensity of Chal in Chalkeios. At the end of my talk, I will also briefly comment on a recent musical performance inspired by Talos. Before turning to Apollonius's Crete, which is under the protection of Talos when the Argonauts approach it, I want to spend a moment in the hyper-present of American politics and show you a short satiric video, a parody of the trolley song from the 1944 Judy Garland film Meet Me in St. Louis. Here, as comedian Randy Rainbow confronts Missouri Republican Senator Josh Hawley about his role in the January 6th Capitol attack, Hawley, in a gesture of blatant projection, declares, "I'm not going to back down before a liberal mob." And now I'm gonna show you this short clip. Very good. So clang, clang, clang is the iconic metallic sound both of the trolley and the bell in this video and in the Garland original. It morphs into yup, 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 crap, 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 mitch, 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 push, 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 yak, 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 bang, 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 creep, creep, and of course, tramp, 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 which replace, among others, ding, ding, zing, zing, thump, 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 and bump, bump. Just as yak is caught between an onomatopoetic verb of laughter and an interjection of disgust, between sense and nonsense, verbs like push, but also proper nouns, tramp and mitch, are turned into quasi-profanity, automated ticks, the rhythmic clamor of engines, or quasi-automated somatic routines, laughing, defecating, intercourse. Language does not simply disintegrate into sound, it becomes noise, what David Theo Goldberg has called, in reference to rowdy protests, the punctuation in the political conversation, or a perturbing intrusion into structure and form, we might say, of a dissensual real. In Rainbow's lyrics, this noise generates a counter-insurrectionary intensity that is a response to a reactionary insurrection which encompasses yet exceeds laughter, marking an interobjective fusion of human and non-human, or a minoritarian intrusion of the mechanical or the robotic into the human. There is also a political force of genderqueer disidentification in the insurrectionary noise, clang, 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 not just because Rainbow becomes Judy Garland and splinters into all the people on the trolley, male and female, but because the verbal repetition converges with the immobile motion of the trolley's looping engine and of the trolley itself fixed against the rear projection, the rear projected scenery, conveying an intense sense of time out of joint, to use a phrase favored in various theorizations of queer temporality. In Apollonius, we find Talos installed by Zeus as the guardian of Crete and Europa on the island, mighty but vulnerable, with a single vein extending from his neck to his ankles, and at the end of the vein a bronze nail. When the Argonauts approach Crete, Talos, a relic of the Hesiodic Bronze Age, is introduced as Talos Kalkeios, while the overlap of phonemic intensities between Tal and Chal is striking in itself. In the narrative report that every day Talos goes around the island 3 times, the adjective Kalkeios appears 3 times. It is as though the textual microcosm from line 1638 to 44, where the island itself, and in stumbling 3 times on the same adjective, the reader's eyes were engaged in a repetitious circular journey equivalent to Talos's daily rounds. The tight sequence tal-cal invites us to linger on the initial syllable of kalkeios and imagine it as an alternative name, with the result that the metallic ontology of the giant becomes at once his identifying marker and the source of this identificatory intensity through the mutilation of the full word and the replacement of tau with kai. The refrain that emerges, "Cal, cal, cal," is not unlike "clang, clang, clang." Cal, in fact, with its initial chi and aspirated voiced velar, is nearly equivalent to gla, the title of the Derrida essay that I mentioned before. Gla, as Bennington and Wills say in the introduction, in their introduction, indicates the fact, event, and performance of a bell ringing. When it is pronounced, the word, they say, begins as a guttural, quasi-metallic, perhaps even industrial clamor or pure noise. Cal, cal, cal resonates with Talos's robotic exertions, with what we might call the crip or queer creaking in his gait as he lumbers around the island. This triple intensity is the sound of Talos's metallic disability or of his hyperability. The resonant power of Tal in Talos breaks off Chal from Kalkeios, giving it an autonomous existence that matches Talos's hyperability as one who is at once broken and unbroken. arrectos. The word break generated by the autonomous force of the phonos team Tal in relation to Chal reproduces Talos's defensive and anti-relational impetus, breaking rocks along the shore, preventing invaders from mooring, from attaching their bodies and their boats to the support of the land. Talos's rock breaking could be seen not just as a function of his guard duty, but as a protest against the labor that has been imposed on him, an insurrection against the idea of bodily wholeness that his disability contests. The refrain Chal, 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 the broken rock form of Chalkeos, emerging ontologically from the power of Tal, in the process of close reading, invites a mimetic quasi-performance of disability, a ghostly inhabitation of crypt embodiment. Derrida connects Gla with Gala, Galaxy, and Galactic, a term that in his essay, A Confrontation of Hegel and Genet, graphically produced through juxtaposed columns, indicates a Genetian queer alternative to Hegelian dialectic. Galactic expresses, in fact, an unruly network of connections woven by the juxtaposition itself. As Derrida puts it, the colossi, that is, Hegel and Genet, exchange an infinite number of overlaps, of winks, double each other up at every opportunity, interpenetrate each other, stick and unstick, passing the one into the other. When the narrative focus switches from Talos to Medea, his adversary, we can see a similar exchange of intensities, vibratory motions, and resonations in Brian Massumi's definition, flows of becoming. Such intensities recall Eve Sedgwick's description of the queer as a continuing moment and movement across that is recurrent eddying. I suggest that we read the intervention of Medea in the episode as a galactic, or we might say a galactic, and I'll now try to explain what I mean. When Medea prepares her magical arts to defeat Talos, we find what Richard Hunter calls the most striking alliteration in the Argonautica, ptuca perfureoio proscomene peploio pareion. This alliteration, an agglutination of labial intensities, is usually taken as the mimetic rendition of a spell. At the same time, this phonetic persistence merges bodily parts and prosthetic supplements, rendering Medea's peplos as a constitutive part of her body, like her cheeks. The brazeness of Talos conveyed by Chal, Chal, Chal is matched by the textile materiality of Medea conveyed by Ptuca porphyreoio peploio, whose repetitive pi sounds also connect with the Syrinx, the single vein that nourishes Talos's body, human and non-human, disabled and hyper-abled, while evoking a wind instrument that operates through repetitive puffing. I want to pursue this kinship further, returning to the metallic refrain Chal, Chal, Chal. If we focus on 7 lines of Medea's prayer from 1666 to 72 and perform what D.A. Miller would call a too close reading, we notice a disassembling and dissemination of elements from the narrative of Talos. The phrase calceio yo talo is twice preceded by tris, 3 times, connected by commentators with the protocols of ritual magic, and by peri dunewesai, a circling around in the air of the keres, the spirits of the night. One has the impression that the repetitive energy of Talos's daily triple circuit around Crete, Peridinewonta, has seeped into textual form as though the motion of the giant persists even as Medea tries to stop it. This returning motion manifests itself most strikingly through a diffusion of metallic intensities. In the line that follows the phrase calceoio talo, The adjective leugaleon, baneful, modifies colon, the anger that Medea directs against Talos. Together, leugaleon and colon contain Chal, the noisy intensity of Talos's bronze, dis, or hyper ability, while the assonant phrase Aidela deikela proialen, with its triple sequence of ela, ela, allen, seems to further prolong it. The viscous materiality that, as Alex Purvis has shown, is attached to Colos, anger, seems also to carry forward traces of Talos's ostensible metallic solidity, his disabled solidity. The circulation of bronze intensities continues in the transition between lines 1675 and 1676, where the verb kaleptei is followed by kalkeios, producing another impression of a galaxy. When just before her spell, Medea says that Talos may be mortal, even if his body is all in bronze, pancalceon, we can take this adjective as an announcement of this galaxy, this pervasive metallic atmosphere. Medea, who is described as polypharmakos, seems to enact the deconstructive ambiguity of the pharmakon, healing and hurting, antidote and poison, making Talos persist in the very language meant to destroy him. Intensity is a pharmakon because it is a force for appearance in disappearance. It carries ontological insistence. Defeated by Medea's incantation, Talos falls and dies when his ankle strikes a sharp rock, while once again futilely lifting Oklizon boulders against his enemies. This verb, oklizo, contains the intensity of his impending collision. When Derrida discusses the intensive power of gla, clang, he envisions the articulation of the phonistem gl, gl, as a vocal contortion, something similar to what happens when one gags or chokes, as though one's speech were impaired by a clot of saliva, mucus, milk, as Bennington and Wills put it. While moving, expressing his apparent kinetic agency, Talos is immobilized by his master, by Zeus's law, or the law that that is by the task ordered by Zeus of lifting rocks, an act whose very intensive substance impedes the giant, as intimated by Kl in Oklizzo. Something similar to saliva or mucus, the blood scrum expressed by the enigmatic word ichor that is concentrated in Talos's only vein is at once Talos's vital fluid and the marker of his disabled embodiment, of the ontological impairment aggravated by his death-driven labor. The moment of Talos's fatal fall coincides with the outpouring, the liberation of his vital fluid, all compressed in the narrow space of a single blood vessel. It is not just that death is a liberation for the oppressed giant, there is also the sense of an impersonal, depersonalized energy freed, brought into the open. The sudden outflow, a literal excess of ichor, places the word in a position of syntactical isolation, a sign of resistance. The etymology of ichor is contested, but a compelling connection has been made between it and ichar, a term translated in dictionaries as burning desire, which in Aeschylus' Saplian women, which occurs in Aeschylus' Saplian women, where it expresses the persistence of rage and grief of the female refugees who are commanded by their Egyptian cousins or the Egyptian herald to abandon the altars they are clinging to interrupt their protest, to stop shouting, to bring their cacophonic resistance to an end. The ichor, spurting at the moment of Talos's death, is thus a biological force of interruption, an unbound impersonal volition the sensual connection of disability and the materialized intensity dispersed like the Danaid's desperate shouting or the phonistine Chal, which turns poetic texture into an insurrectionary galaxy. The volitional intensity that links Talos to MEDEA while maintaining its impersonal force also manifests itself at the moment that the giant falls. When Talos dies, an epic simile assimilates him to a tree, to a tree half cut with axes by woodcutters, shaken by the winds at night and crashing to the ground. This is an obvious Homeric allusion, as Richard Hunter observes, quote, the passage evokes Homeric similes, comparing the fall of warriors to the collapse of trees, thus continuing the presentation of Medea's triumph as a single combat, end quote. But if we apply once again a too close reading, one that, as Miller puts it, heats fracture points in an image's presumed obviousness, we can arrive at a different reading. The feminine vehicle of Talos in the simile, the gigantic, monstrous pine tree, accompanied by the feminine pronoun ten, creates an effect of excess, of spilling out, emphasized by the alliterative persistence, triple once again, of pelorie, peuche, pelekessi, which brings Medea herself into the picture. In the prologue of Euripides' Medea, the pine tree cut off by axes to build the Argo, Peuche, is a patent figuration of Medea herself, cut off from her family and about to cut herself off from her children, whom she'll kill in a reenactment of her cutting her brother to pieces. Pelorie Peuche Pelekesse is not simply a striking echo of Peliu Pesein Peuche in the initial lines of the Euripidean prologue. We can say that this is an example of the intensive power of language, or a transformation of language into what Deleuze calls style, a minoritarian force that emerges when, in his words, a spark flashes and breaks out of language itself, when words produce sparks leaping between them, even over great distance. This spark transforms the narrative of Medea with its distinctive symbols into a nomadic energy, both bound by particular configuration of sound and unbound in its insurrectionary power of circulation and transformation. Through the phonetic conflation of pelorie and peuche in pelekessi, the pine tree becomes the axe, the victim, the aggressor, the object, a subject, Talos, Medea herself. The discovery of this affinity and mutual deterritorialization brings us back to Calcaeus, the word with which we began. Calcaeus, in fact, vibrates with the same sound as Colcheis, a woman from Colchis, that is Medea. In the resistant galaxy that I have explored, little more than an exchange of aspirated intensities separates Talos and Medea, the bronze giant and the woman from Colchis. Beyond their connective capacity, the verbal intensities making up this galaxy seem to be endowed with an autonomous force, a kind of insistent bronze resilience, which, in a sense, is the very stubbornness of poetic form. The insistent metallic intensities of Talos and therefore of Medea can also be read as feminist intensities through the mediation of Jack Halberstam's GAGA feminism. In this book, ringing is a prominent motif, and so is one of its source objects, the iconic telephone in Lady Gaga's eponymous song and video from 2010, which, in Halberstam's words, burbles and beeps, hiccups and repeats insistently, calling and ringing and calling, and chaining us all to the charisma of the pop beat, even as heterosexuality itself seems like an event in a distant past. Ringing here is the intense murmur of a queer anarchic feminism which seeps into the musical cadence of Halberstam's language. The fact that, as Halberstam explains, The name Lady Gaga itself arose through a digital glitch, an autocorrection of the phrase Radio Gaga adds a further metallic ring to the Gaga through a chain of association. First, the 1984 song by Queen with its metallic sound, and then the accompanying video, a pastiche of the Fritz Lang silent film Metropolis, in which humans become prostheses of machinery and the robot is transformed into a female cyborg. Through this chain of associations, the name Lady Gaga becomes a marker both of Halberstam's anarchic feminism and of a metallic formalism. This metallic formalism comes through in Halberstam's declaration of Gaga feminism as from Lady Gaga, as distinct from Lady Gaga herself. From the get-go, religion is a no-no, and God has got to go-go. In this percussive insistence and guttural intensity, the insurrectionary formalism of metallic mimeticism, we can find an emancipatory politics, feminist, queer, cyborgic, as we can in Talos's calc, 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 and MEDEA's call, 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 which also bring to mind what Legacy Russell has called glitch feminism. Russell's feminist manifesto celebrates the glitch, the digital failure, and other metallic intensity as a vehicle of refusal. This glitch, like the metallic galaxy in Apollonius's poetic form, creates a fissure within which new possibilities of being and becoming manifest themselves. I want to conclude by showing a couple of minutes of a recent musical performance called Talos Dreams, commissioned by the Greek Chamber Music Project and sponsored by the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. This musical experiment is not an archaeological project. It is not, in other words, an attempt to reconstruct ancient music. Inspired by the account of the Talos episode in Adrian Mayer's book, Gods and Robots, it is an imaginative exercise in queer ahistoricism, a non-hierarchical encounter between modern affect and ancient impressions. It features a new musical metallic instrument called the ghost plate, which the composer Kostas Daphnis invented to create, as he puts it, an atmospheric, echoing, wispy, and metallic sonic palette. The piece is divided into various sections, including one called I-core. So I'm going to ask you to listen to the beginning. Okay, this section is called Mechanism. Okay, so I get to my conclusions. In the junkyard, the symbol of the capitalistic transformation of the subject into disposable machinery, discrete metallic intensities emanating from the ghost plate can create the conditions for an interobjective encounter that is an exchange of intensities between the derelict cars and the metallic instrumental prostheses provisionally appended to the human body. This encounter is also a ontological site where the coming together of impressions of present, past, and future turn time into affect, into a space of virtuality rescued from the related obsessions of origin and teleology, a space, in Deleuze's famous words, of a perpetual present cut off from temporality. This is the perpetual present of a minoritarian political insistence, the insistence of the radical formalisms of Argonautic poetic texture, of MEDEA's GAGA or Chal feminism, of Talos's creep motions, of the repeated exertions of his bronze body, but also of glitchy insurrectionary intensities beyond and against the subject. Thank you.